The Supreme Court's decision hit like a shockwave, reverberating from gun shops in Virginia to homes in Arizona, and echoing through the very heart of American life. It was a ruling that no one could ignore, and its impact was felt instantly, from the bustling city streets to the quiet corners of rural America. At shooting ranges in Texas, the news spread quickly, whispered between shots and shared in anxious conversations. People paused mid-practice, their routines interrupted by the uncertainty of what this meant for their rights and their futures. In a small Virginia gun shop, a retired officer named Dave watched the news, feeling the ruling struck at the core of his beliefs. For Dave, who had spent decades defending the Constitution, the decision felt personal, like a betrayal of the values he'd sworn to uphold. He saw it as a threat to a fundamental American right, a right he believed was as essential as free speech or the right to vote. The flag and the Constitution on the wall seemed to take on new weight, symbols of a freedom now under question. In Arizona, Sarah, a medical marijuana user and gun owner, felt a chill, suddenly forced to choose between her health and her safety. She'd always followed the law, but now overnight her life was split in two. She stared at her gun safe, questioning if she was now a criminal. The safe, once a symbol of security, now felt like a source of anxiety and doubt. At a Texas shooting range, the owner argued the government was unfairly targeting law-abiding citizens, pointing out that alcohol users aren't banned from owning guns. He spoke passionately to anyone who would listen, his frustration echoing off the concrete walls. Frustration and betrayal filled the air. Customers and staff alike felt blindsided, their trust in the system shaken. Some clenched their fists, others just shook their heads in disbelief. Online, gun forums erupted with outrage and defiance. Memes, legal arguments, and vows of non-compliance spread rapidly. The digital world became a battleground, with users trading stories, advice, and warnings about what might come next. Many felt the court had ignored both history and common sense. In living rooms and online chats, people debated what the founders would have thought, and whether the country was losing its way. For this community, the ruling wasn't just legal theory. It was a direct threat to their way of life. Families gathered around kitchen tables, trying to make sense of what the future might hold, and local meetings filled with worried faces and urgent questions. The debate was only just beginning, and the country was deeply divided. Town halls and protests became flashpoints, with passionate arguments on both sides and no easy answers in sight. The ruling had turned millions of Americans into potential criminals overnight. Lines formed outside gun stores, not just for purchases, but for answers. People desperate to know where they now stood in the eyes of the law. The shock was real, and the consequences, immediate. Across the nation, people grappled with fear, anger, and confusion, knowing that the story was far from over, and that the next chapter would be written by their response. The law at the center of this storm is not new. In fact, it's been shaping the nation's approach to guns and drugs for more than half a century, quietly influencing who can and cannot own a firearm. It's a provision of the 1968 Gun Control Act, passed during a turbulent era of American history. The law says that anyone who is an unlawful user of a controlled substance cannot possess a firearm. This was part of a broader effort to address rising crime and social unrest at the time, and it reflected deep concerns about public safety. What's striking is that this ban doesn't require someone to be caught with drugs and a gun at the same time. Simply being considered an unlawful user is enough to trigger the restriction, even if the two are never found together. Since 1998, when the federal background check system went into effect, this rule has become the second most common reason for denying gun sales, right after felony convictions. Thousands of people each year are turned away from buying firearms because of it. The government's logic is straightforward. Drugs and guns are a dangerous mix. Officials argue that people under the influence of drugs may be more likely to act recklessly or violently, putting themselves and others at risk. But the law's language is vague. What exactly counts as an unlawful user? The statute doesn't define how recent or frequent drug use must be, leaving courts and law enforcement to interpret its meaning. Does it include someone who used marijuana last month, or only those who use regularly? What about people who have stopped using but have a past record? And what about someone using cannabis legally under state law, in places where marijuana is permitted for medical or recreational use? The federal ban doesn't make exceptions, even as state laws evolve. The Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision raised the stakes, demanding that gun laws align with the nation's historical tradition. Suddenly, courts had to look back in time to see if similar restrictions existed centuries ago. Now, judges across the country had to ask, did similar bans exist when the Second Amendment was written? Was there a historical precedent for denying gun rights to people who used intoxicating substances? That question brought the issue to the nation's highest court, setting the stage for a legal battle that could reshape the intersection of drug policy and gun rights in America. Every Supreme Court case starts with a person, a real-life, everyday story that suddenly becomes a matter of national importance. This time, that person was Ali Daniel Himani, an ordinary man whose life would soon be at the center of a constitutional battle. In 2023, federal agents arrived at Himani's Texas home. During their search, they discovered a pistol, some marijuana, and a small amount of cocaine, items that would set off a legal firestorm. Himani openly admitted to being a habitual marijuana user. But he wasn't high at the time, nor was he accused of any violent act. He was simply at home, not threatening anyone. Still, under a 1968 federal law, Himani was charged for possessing a firearm as a drug user, a law that had rarely been challenged so directly before. Himani's legal team saw an opportunity. They argued that the law was outdated and unconstitutional, especially in light of the Supreme Court's new Bruin standard, which redefined how courts should interpret the Second Amendment. The case made its way to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. In a landmark decision, the judges sided with Himani, declaring the law unconstitutional as it applied to him. The court's opinion was clear. American history supported disarming those who were actively intoxicated, not those who were sober but had used drugs in the past. For gun rights advocates, this was a huge victory, a sign that the courts were willing to reconsider old laws in light of new constitutional interpretations. But the Justice Department quickly appealed, warning that the ruling could set a dangerous precedent and make it harder to keep guns away from those who use drugs. The Supreme Court agreed to take up the case, thrusting Himani's story into the national spotlight and setting the stage for a historic legal showdown. Now, the outcome of Himani's case would have consequences for millions of Americans, gun owners, advocates, and families across the country. The stakes had never been higher, with both sides anxiously awaiting a decision that could reshape the nation's gun laws. As the debate reached its peak, the entire nation watched, knowing that the Supreme Court's ruling would echo for generations to come. The Justice Department's argument was simple: public safety. They claimed illegal drug users pose a unique risk, impaired judgment, impulsivity, and ties to the drug trade. They pointed to historical laws disarming drunkards, arguing today's drug users are a modern equivalent. The ban, they said, is temporary. Stop using drugs, regain your rights. Striking down the law, they warned, would let those involved in illegal drugs legally arm themselves. The government insisted this was a vital tool for law enforcement. For them, the case was about preventing preventable violence. Himani's lawyers countered with the Second Amendment. They argued the government failed the Bruin test. There's no historical tradition of disarming sober citizens for past drug use. Laws against drunkards targeted public disorder, not private status. The term unlawful user is vague. How much use is too much? With marijuana legal in many states but illegal federally, millions could lose their rights for following state law. Himani wasn't accused of violence or intoxication, just of belonging to a group the government distrusts. The defense warned this sets a dangerous precedent for stripping rights based on status, not actions. The court had to decide, does history support this ban, or is it government overreach? The law's reach is vast. Even Hunter Biden, the president's son, was convicted under it. His case spotlighted how the law can touch anyone, regardless of status. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans use marijuana, 1 in 3 own guns. The overlap means millions could be felons for conduct legal in their state. Veterans using medical marijuana, professionals in legal states, cancer patients in rural areas, all face impossible choices. The human cost is real. One Oregon man sold his family rifle out of fear. A Nevada woman, a domestic abuse survivor, worried her CBD use could make her a criminal. These aren't hardened criminals, they're ordinary people caught in a legal crossfire. The Supreme Court's decision brought anxiety and uncertainty to their lives. The law's impact is personal, not just political. The stakes are measured in lives, not just legal arguments. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through the gun-owning community. Many see it as a betrayal of the Bruin precedent and a slippery slope. If drug users can be disarmed, who's next? They point to the double standard: alcohol users keep their guns, but marijuana users can't, even in legal states. The law punishes status, not dangerous actions. Now, gun owners in legal marijuana states face federal felony charges for following state law. The ruling forces impossible choices: give up your rights, your medicine, or risk prosecution. The fear is real, and the future uncertain. For many, this is about more than guns. It's about trust in the system. With the Supreme Court's decision, the federal ban stands. Law enforcement will keep using it to deny gun sales and prosecute cases like Jimenez. But the fight isn't over, it's moving to Congress. Gun and cannabis advocates may unite to push for changes to the Gun Control Act, or federal marijuana laws. If marijuana is decriminalized federally, the ban could disappear for millions. The legal landscape is still shifting. For now, gun owners must navigate a confusing patchwork of state and federal law. The debate over rights, safety, and history is far from finished.